Awesome. So my name is Corein Carter. I'm here on the behalf of Forbes.com. Super duper excited to talk to you today. We're here today with Ahmed Tigani, Acting Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Development. And you're a leading voice in New York City, especially when it comes to the space of equity. I would love for you, number one, to just give a little bit about your background. You have been in many different roles when it comes to this housing development department, but I want you to talk a little bit on your past here.
Yeah, no, I think that, first of all, thank you for coming here to interview us. When I say us, I speak on behalf of the agency. I consider myself very much a part of this significant and important and deep team of policy thinkers and advocates and planners and enforcement specialists. HPD's work primarily is focused on how do we continue to stabilize and actually help grow a global city as thriving and wonderful as New York City. So we're a team that not only works to create and preserve housing, that's a primary piece of what we do to contribute to the housing stock, but we also think about how the buildings that we oversee, we have 3.6 million units of housing in New York City. How are they making sure that they are protected and enforced under the housing maintenance code? So hundreds of inspectors, a comprehensive umbrella of enforcement regimes in place to make sure that tenants are protected, owners who want to do the right thing and get the work done. We give them the tools to get that work done. And when we think about the other ways that we help, we're building, we're financing the building of, we're protecting, but we're also thinking about the impact of that housing is going to be. So where we're putting our money and our resources in, we are also bringing urban planners who have not only housing expertise, but just a larger sense of what the built environment should look like, and working on neighborhood plans, either in collaboration with other talented colleagues at Department of City Planning or Economic Development Corporation, or leading those plans on our own. And then after we go through the financing tools, we go through the enforcement piece, we think about how our neighborhoods who are going to be the recipient of these resources will look and feel 10, 20, 50 years down the line. We're also the 5th largest administrator of rental assistance. And so we, along with NYCHA, administer rental assistance Section 8 vouchers and other special voucher programs, including supportive housing programs that stabilize and give people an opportunity to go into the private market and also find affordable options for themselves and their families. You asked me a question about my background, and I have had the good fortune of being able to make New York my home, because when we got here, my mom, who was a single mom who raised 2 kids, was able to get the help of local government and nonprofit and faith-based resources so that we can have the resources we need to continue to grow and be part of this city. Now, I will be the first one to say, she is and always has been a phenomenal woman, but you also, even if you're phenomenal, it always helps to have partners. And at that time, we had people in government and in our community that stepped up to give us the kind of support we needed in order to move and advance to that next step and grow. And I've always taken that to heart, and it's always reminded me that whatever I do for the rest of my life, it needs to be something that pays that forward and gives that back. It's the reason why I went into planning. It's the reason why I focused on housing. It's the reason why throughout my career, whether it's the city council or the Manhattan Borough President's office, or taking on several senior leadership roles at the mayor's office under the last administration, chief of staff at the Department of Building, jobs that all have a focus on the built environment. But I always took and carry with me the experiences I had as someone who benefited from the government reaching out. I always wanted to be able to be that person who reaches out and pays that forward through whatever role that is. And here at HPD, both as first deputy commissioner of the Office of Neighborhood Strategies, and then later as the first deputy commissioner and the chief diversity officer here, and now as the acting commissioner, these have all been phenomenal opportunities to do that work.
Yes.
But most importantly, and just going back to an earlier point, I don't have to do that alone.
Yes.
I am surrounded by incredibly talented colleagues who care deeply about not only financing, building housing, but doing it in an equitable way that increases access in every corner of our city, and making sure that we're all part of the responsibility of attacking the housing crisis head on.
I love that. I love that. And you spoke on something that, just speaking about impact, that kind of rolls me into this next question. I want to talk about the real impact of New York City's housing programs, particularly when it pertains to low income applicants. Many residents from underserved communities rely on NYC's affordable housing programs, but they often face long delays in rates and a lack of communication, which is heard from some of the consumers. I want to know how the city is measuring the real impact of these programs, and what improvements are you going to be making on your behalf now that you're acting commissioner?
And that's an excellent question. So let me take a step and talk about what we see as our
Yeah.
main charge when we walk in through the door. So we are in a city that has a tremendously strong and growing population.
Yes.
We're above and reaching pre-pandemic levels, but
Yes.
that also means that the number of housing units that we create needs to be able to meet that demand. And as
Mhm.
many people know, as is very evident, we're in a housing crisis that's continues to create very difficult conditions for people to
Yes.
be able to be stable in New York City. We're at a vacancy rate of 1.4% the last
Wow.
time that we measured, which is the lowest it's been since we began counting this rate 60 years ago. And at that point, when you think and you break down the numbers further, we're at like a virtual zero when it comes 0%. We're at 3.9%.
Wow.
Where units at $1,100 a month, we're at 0.94% for units at $2,400 a month or lower. So we're in a place where the stock and the affordability doesn't meet the demand that's out there.
Yeah.
And so for us at HPD, there are two ways that we see our responsibility here. One, in the production and the financing of new units on our public sites and out there in our communities, using our financial role as both a financer and gap filler to make sure that we are getting buildings built using the public dollars that we're given to help shape the financial responsibility is and the affordability in those buildings to really attack the problem that we're seeing out there in the world. We are activating our public sites. We're using public land as a way to get there more quickly, because by using public land, we can make some of the costs cheaper to develop that housing, and then make that available and work throughout the boroughs to see where we can bring more affordable housing, especially in neighborhoods that may not have seen it before.
Yeah.
Separately, preserving housing that's already existing, where we have New Yorkers who have been here, but their buildings are going through physical and financial distress. We see our responsibility, especially when you take out the numbers around housing construction that uses tax abatement tools. A great percentage of our money goes toward preserving those homes, and that's affordable rental that would be impossible to replace in any other circumstance. That's HDFC co-ops, otherwise known as limited equity co-ops, where the affordability of homeownership was started at a low rate, and we're trying to make sure that families who are low, middle, and moderate income New Yorkers continue to be able to thrive and afford that homeownership opportunity. That's preserving our Mitchell-Lama stock, which is a housing program that was 50, 60 years old and created both rental and homeownership opportunities in the city, and really created a place for the middle income working family New Yorker to be able to settle and call it home. Those buildings are going under tremendous building and financial distress, and we're putting money into that. So I think that the work that we're doing to address that issue is making sure that on the new construction side, we're using our dollars to get to unit levels, I mean affordability levels and number of units that really address where people's incomes are. 93% of our subsidized housing our subsidized housing financing goes into units that are 80% AMI or lower. That's $110,000 for a family of three. So you've got a teacher and a nurse with a kid. We're building units for those families. And then when you go even lower, you've got 69% for families at 50% of AMI. So that's $70,000 for a family of three. And so you'll see that we're trying and make gains at every level. And of course, beyond that, there are vulnerable families. There are people who were on hard times. My family benefited from rental assistance, where we have programs specifically targeted to getting people out of homeless shelters and making sure that they have access to the really beautiful, well-designed new housing that we're building. So at least 15, if not more, % of our new construction and now in our preservation projects are going toward referrals from homeless shelters. So, and then you get to the point of like, what are we doing to streamline the process? Because once you build it, you have to make sure that you're finding ways to expedite getting people into the housing. So Housing Connect does two things right now. Housing Connect, first of all, creates a transparent and clear place where if you ask the question, where do I go to find housing? Instead of having to chase down here, there, and everywhere, you can go to one place, understand what the process is, and be able to apply for housing lotteries that are citywide in one location. You create a profile and you're able to move forward. That said, there certainly is justified frustration with the fact that there are only X number of units and so many users. We have 1 million unique profiles on Housing Connect. 16 million applications last year, and we do see hundreds, if not more, for every unit that comes on. That being said, we can continue to improve, and streamline that work. So we're right now working through a new set of tech changes to improve the smoothness of that work. We have been working on the ability to, where our funding requires certain sign-offs and information in order to move someone through the application process, trying to see where we can reduce paperwork, expedite that timing, use information that we may already have for those households, especially those who are coming through public assistance projects that we already have, to get them to the next step rather than have them duplicated, or making sure that we're working within a timeline where information that they give us doesn't go stale and old, and having them have to replicate that information again, which of course is a time burden on them.
Absolutely.
The idea is to reduce the burden on the person who's applying for housing, get them into housing faster, and get more people into these units. I think one of the most proud stats that we have is in our homeless placement services, the work that we do to get people out of shelter and into the units that we've dedicated for those units, for those families. We have now reached 46,000 families last year, which is, I believe, more than half of where we were before. And so in just a couple of years, we've been able to do things like no longer require credit checks if you have a voucher. We're going to reduce the number of pay stubs that you need in order to confirm your eligibility. We're looking at the age of documents as a way to say, we don't want you to have to keep on replicating the same paperwork over and over again. But you take that, and we've applied that to what we're doing in Section 8 applications. We take that and we look to apply that to what we're doing overall with all our systems in all the different work streams I mentioned, because the time that's added costs money. The money that we could be using to put that back into projects and building more housing. So it's very important for us. We think this is something that needs to be at the top of our list, because it's an equity issue. In the same way that we focus on building that housing, we have to focus on recapping as much money as we can so that we can put that back into building more housing.
Love that. So I kind of want to roll into gentrification a little bit, because we know that this is a hot topic, especially here in New York City. When we think of gentrification, especially when it pertains to the Black community, there has been a lot of displacement. And the Black community, when you think of places such as Brooklyn, Harlem, and the Bronx, it's being reshaped right now. In what ways is the city using zoning and development policy to preserve cultural integrity and protect long-term residents from being pushed out, especially when you look at communities like the Black community?
Yeah, I think that this has been one of the most important questions when we've approached how to develop new housing.
Yeah.
Because right now, given the supply situation, we certainly need more units in order to keep up with demand. But there is a way to be thoughtful about that
Hmm.
approach. There's a way to consider what the impact will be on our communities. And there's a way to think about it strategically so that when we're building more housing, we're thinking about both the hard and the social infrastructure that should
Yes.
go along with it. So, from a neighborhood level perspective, I think some of the neighborhoods you just mentioned also are some of the neighborhoods where, as a city, we have done a lot of work to make sure that there are plans in place that think beyond the housing. If you think about the Jerome neighborhood plan, if you
Yes.
think about the Brownsville neighborhood plan, if you think about the Bed-Stuy neighborhood plan, what all of those plans have in common is that they looked at an area-wide analysis of what the housing situation is
Hmm.
at the moment, what the growth possibility could be given that people in those neighborhoods were seeing less opportunity for themselves to be able to move into larger units if their family required, or if they had family and kids coming back from college and wanted to live back in their neighborhood, their options were limited and the
Yeah.
costs were high. So from HPD's perspective in that work, we were looking first, we would always start with an analysis of what public sites do we have, what public land do we have in those areas where we can apply our financing strategy, 100% affordable, low income, sustainably designed housing to contribute something that we think will really benefit growth in those neighborhoods. And then beyond that, we would think about what other programs we have for the people who already live there. So we
Mm.
have preservation programs where buildings and their buildings with owners who are looking to be long-term stewards, good stewards of their neighborhood, they come to us and they work with our preservation finance team to get tax abatements
Mm.
or capital dollars to make necessary investments to keep their building systems up, or repair broken pieces of their facade. And through that, we're able to make an agreement with them to keep the units affordable at a certain rate
Yeah.
that really meets what the neighborhood is seeing their desire for affordability to be. And then there are obviously other classes of housing that we need to also protect. So a great example is in the Brownsville plan. We'd spent $1 billion of collective investment through housing and other pieces, $150 million in different community needs that not only help the homeowners through new housing and preservation pieces, but we also invested in the parks and
Yeah.
the streets. I mean, these are costs that if people have to go elsewhere to use a park or pay for another service that we could bring into their neighborhood, then that's less money they have in order to pay rent or invest in their home. The Bed-Stuy plan is a great example of how we really got really into the weeds of what homeowners, especially low
Yeah.
income and moderate income homeowners, are seeing and suffering with in their neighborhoods. And so from that, we designed a pilot called the Homeowner Help Desk,
Mm.
which worked with 4 CBOs centered with the Center for New York City Neighborhoods and created a one-stop shop for homeowners who had questions about how do I get a low interest loan, which, by the way, HPD has the Home Fix program that provides no low interest or forgivable loans for homeowners, especially targeted towards seniors and low-income homeowners,
Yeah.
so they can make necessary repairs. We also were able to build out that homeowner help desk to create a manual, which is a guidance, other things you may need. Maybe you're suffering through DOB confusion, or you have a Department of Finance question that you
Yeah.
have. We've been able to use this platform to create a place where homeowners can go to get services and get questions answered. And now, based on the work in the Bed-Stuy plan, it's a citywide program. It's
Yeah.
baselined. It's now available. It was available only to a couple of pilot neighborhoods. Now it's citywide for homeowners everywhere. Cease and desist zones where owners were getting incessant calls about selling their property and felt harassed. That came out of the Bed-Stuy plan. First time down payment assistance.
Yes.
These are things that came out of these plans. And I think if you go further and you look at these neighborhood plans, they'll either have their own housing plan attached, or they'll have integrated into the work a review of what the density should look like. Plus, when we're looking at new construction, now we have requirements that there should be mandatory, permanently affordable units as part of that work. If you are creating, in the Gowanus neighborhood, it was estimated that this is a neighborhood that we consider a low affordability area. People are striving to live there, and rent is high. But now moving forward, due to the rezoning of the 8,000 units or so that's supposed to be created, at least 25%, if not more, are going to be income restricted and accessible to a greater variety of people and backgrounds than it would have otherwise. The neighborhood plans have been very effective at not only starting policies, but injecting policies to make sure that when there's private development, that they're thinking about affordability. Where there's programming that could help to stabilize people and keep them in place, preservation or loans to support homeowners, we're doing that work. And then it's also the place where we can come and invent new programs. The neighborhood plans also was the place, East Harlem, I'm thinking right now, as one of the main places we had this conversation, Partners in Preservation. So Partners in Preservation is a program where we bring legal aid, tenant advocates, and government partners together. We're working with the Mayor's Office of the Public Engagement Unit. We're working with the Office of Civil Justice, where we bring all the tools one needs in order to find those buildings where tenants feel like they need more support, and we bring that support to them. And before it started as just a project in our neighborhood plans, now it's a baseline program that started at 30 districts, and now because of work and collaboration with the councils through City of Yes, we're in 39 community districts citywide. And then I would say, just on that last piece, this is another example if we can't do it alone, right? So all of these programs, whether it is Partners in Preservation, the homeowner help desk, the preservation work, this goes back to my own thinking and life story and ethos, that government can help. We can't do it alone. We succeed best when we're doing a partnership. We can create new housing and preserve and protect people in place and push back against the forces that keep people out of their neighborhood when we're working together. And the last thing I can't fail to mention, I'm sorry it's a lot, this is why video's hard. So then there's the work getting just more rooted into fair housing. I should also mention that another great tool that we have now that helps owners is J51. So J51 is a tax abatement that we fought very hard to get renewed, and got passed by the council recently, and it's going to be another great tool that owners can use to make repairs to buildings. No impact on the tenants in terms of cost, and then those units obviously would be in better condition so tenants can live in those units long term, especially rent stabilized tenants. So the thing I wanted to mention was that's our neighborhood planning work, but then individual projects that come through and get rezoned, there's a lot of concern about that too. Because, you're not part of a neighborhood plan. Maybe you came in through a neighborhood plan, but I'm not sure you're connected to the values and policies and the communication and the community meetings and part of that work. So we worked with the council on a piece of legislation that created a new analysis tool, because part of the discussion, especially when it goes through ULURP, is everyone armed with the same information to make the arguments they need to make. And that's why the Equitable Development Data Explorer, EDDI, is a really integral piece to the land use work. So this tool that now exists, certain projects of certain size, there's about 6 or 7 different criteria, have to file reports on its impact on the neighborhood. So we've always had environmental review, but going further, this evaluates sort of demographics and other criteria about the neighborhood, and considering how this housing would contribute or be impactful on the neighborhood one way or